Okay, yeah, I think we're ready to get started. Welcome everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion and to the launch of the Responsible AI Initiative at CMU. Over the last several months, our team from across CMU has been working hard planning this initiative, and we're all very excited that all of you have joined us today to be part of this launch. If you are familiar with CMU, which very likely are, you probably already know the history of the critical and leading role people from CMU have played in the creation of AI and the expansion in the adoption of AI. I think over the last few years, a lot of our researchers and faculty and students from different departments, from history and design and English to engineering to policy and business and computer science and HCI and language technologies and robotics and machine learning. They've kind of also been leading the design and development and the deployment of AI in a responsible manner, in a manner to ensure that the systems being built are accountable and transparent, and then they lead towards a more just and equitable world. And so the initiative that we're launching, the CMU's Responsible AI Initiative, it's really bringing together these researchers and faculty and educators and staff and students that span all of these different disciplines, that span all of the different schools and colleges at CMU. And the real focus of this initiative also spans those areas, right? So the idea behind this initiative is to really go and translate research to policy and societal impact, to make sure that we are collaborating and co-designing with our local communities and with the public at large, so that the systems that are built are serving those communities, and to offer hands-on experiential education and research opportunities for our students, for our staff, for our faculty, and really do it in a way, in a collaborative way, in partnership with people like a lot of you here, right? So that when we develop and deploy these AI tools and methodologies, they aren't really built in a vacuum and kind of thrown nowhere, that they are built very much in partnership with you. So all of you here from different organizations, whether you're from within CMU or coming from a different university or coming in from governments, nonprofits, industry, would love to learn more about what you're doing, how you can work with us. So feel free to contact us, whether telling us about it today or also emailing us at responsibleai@cmu.edu. Would love to learn how to work with all of you in different ways and how to partner with you. And that's basically the core of this initiative. It's not about developing more AI for the sake of AI, but it's very much anchored in people, in communities, in societal issues, and in supporting efforts across CMU that lead, that take our work and lead to impact. So I'm very honored to be moderating this panel, and we have a distinguished set of panelists here today that I'm looking forward to talking with. As we launch into the panel, I sort of want to set the stage. As someone who spent the last many years working with governments, with NGOs, on helping them design AI systems for a variety of policy problems, sort of firmly believe that there's a lot that AI has to offer to benefit society. And so I want to sort of make sure that the panel that we're going to have, the idea here is we're all coming in with the belief that AI can have a positive impact on the world, but we have to do it responsibly. We have to do it correctly. We have to do it in a way that's ethical. And the panel is really going to focus on how do we make sure we do that. So I kind of want to just get into the panel. I want to welcome my fellow panelists, and I'd like them. So I'm going to start. I'll start with Hoda Heidari, who's a professor here at Carnegie Mellon. I'll start with her. Hoda, if you want to introduce yourself, and then tell us, what are you excited about the most around AI's potential for improving society? Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rayid. I am likewise very honored to be part of this the esteemed set of panelists. Just to introduce myself, I am an assistant professor in the machine learning department at the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon. I'm also affiliated with the Societal Computing Program at the Institute for Software Research. At a high level, my research investigates the societal implications and ethical desiderata around the use of machine learning in high stakes domains, those that directly or indirectly impact people's lives. And some of the questions that my work seeks to address are issues such as, to what extent can we model and measure non-compliance with human values such as fairness so that we can audit these systems at scale? How can we design tools and protocols for practitioners interested in critically evaluating their work? What are the limits of concepts such as explainability and audits for ensuring accountability of these systems? Accountability is, of course, one of the topics that in the coming years, I believe we have to focus on increasingly. And perhaps last but definitely not least, how can we design participatory frameworks to effectively involve impacted communities and stakeholders in all these processes? I find that interdisciplinary collaborations are vital to this research agenda, and I'm very lucky to be at CMU, where interdisciplinary work is very much part of the ethos and the culture. I would be remiss if I don't highlight some of the work that some of my colleagues are doing related to topics on responsible AI. Here at Carnegie Mellon, we are lucky to have a large number of renowned researchers all across CMU investigating issues related to responsible AI from a variety of perspectives, and they come from a variety of backgrounds and disciplines. Here I would like to just to give you a flavor of the breadth of work that is being done in this area across CMU and why we were so motivated to launch this initiative. I would like to give you a very small sample. Again, I won't be able to do justice to all the amazing work that is being done at CMU. I'm just gonna mention one project or one faculty in some of our schools and colleges. So my colleague and good friend Mutahari Islami is in the HCI Institute at the School of Computer Science. Her work investigates how public algorithms impact their users and how we can design frameworks to empower them. Her work is done in close partnership with public sector agencies like Permit, License, and Inspection Department here. At Heinz, we have Rayid and we have Liman Akoglu, who works on fairness considerations in outlier detection in domains such as fraud detection. At Dietrich College of Humanities and Social Sciences, we have Isel Sanford, who is a historian interested in histories of race, science, and medicine. At Tepper, we have Taiwan Kim and John Hooker, who are interested in business ethics, future of workplace, and cross-cultural business ethics. At the College of Fine Arts, we have Kristen Hughes, who focuses on how collaborative community design solutions can catalyze social and civic engagement. So this is, again, just a small sample. The point being that here at CMU, we take this idea of focusing on impact and on impacted communities very seriously. And I hope to be able to mention more of the exciting work that's being done in this area at CMU. Now getting to your question, sorry, I am way too excited. So this took longer than anticipated. So in terms of what I am the most excited about around AI, I would keep it short, and I would say at an intellectual level, what I find very interesting is the fact that these systems, they force us to see long-standing social issues from a new perspective. For example, they require us, when we are thinking about designing an algorithm to assist or automate decision-making, they force us to specify with clarity and precision what is the goal, how are we operationalizing the goal, what is the input, what is the output, and so on. So they kind of force us to look at long-standing issues from a new lens, and that to me is intellectually very, very stimulating.
Okay, thank you, Hoda. I guess we'll go to Paula. Paula, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us what are you most excited about around AI's potential for improving the world around us.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm just really excited about the launch of this initiative. And I find it really heartening to see efforts of this sort of spreading throughout academia. I think they have the potential to make just an enormous impact on the trajectory of this technology. So I'm Paula Goldman. I'm Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer at Salesforce, which means that I'm charged with creating and implementing frameworks around the ethics of our technology, both policy frameworks, but also working with our product teams when we build these technologies to make sure that they have safeguards built in, that we are building stuff that is good for society and so on. And I will say, and I think it was really important to state at the outset, kind of that framework of, because ethics tends to talk about a lot of the risks, right? But speaking for myself, I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't also have a real sense of technology's potential and a real personal mission to kind of make sure that we realize that potential in a way that truly benefits society. So when I think about AI, I think about the potential of sort of AI in partnership with human judgment and human decision making. And the ways in which those two things can complement each other and lead to better outcomes. So for example, I think of AI and cancer detection, right? And the ability potentially for AI to see things that a human eye might not see naturally, but also you wouldn't want to just turn the thing over to a machine. You'd want human judgment to be, and safeguards and processes to be part of that whole process. But you can imagine how the two things in combination could literally save lives, right? Or I think about climate informatics and the application of machine learning to large data sets of very complex weather patterns and climate patterns, and how that might similarly enable anticipation of extreme weather events. And again, preparatory actions that could potentially save lives or improve people's lives, right? I think, so when you think about it at this aggregate level, it is the combination of those two things, along with the reckoning of the social implications, the safeguards, the processes, the accountability, that if you get all of those things together right, there's enormous potential for AI to just contribute to all of our lives.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks. Claudia, do you want to go next and introduce yourself and then tell us about your excitement?
Absolutely happy to jump in, and thanks for having me. This is shaping up to be a very fun conversation. My name is Claudia Juech. I'm the Vice President of Data and Society at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. The Patrick J. McGovern Foundation is a relatively young foundation based in the United States, but working globally on using data and AI to create thriving, inclusive, and equitable societies for everyone. So we are one of the few organizations that in the philanthropic space who solely focus on the use of data and AI, supporting projects, but also trying to help create an enabling environment and data in kind of the infrastructure that's needed for this young field to really mature further for nonprofit organizations and for societies. My role there is, even though the title sounds, data and society, I would describe myself as a practitioner. So I have a technical team of data engineers and data scientists, and we work very closely with nonprofit organizations. And when I say nonprofit, I mean the NGOs that you were referring to, Rayid, or civil society organizations. And this is still a very young field. So there's a lot of kind of further assistance needed. A lot of organizations are still at a stage where even kind of using data for operational purposes is kind of, it's still early days around that. Some have ventured and do more around evaluation, but I think there's still a lot of potential, and Paula talked about that, as well in the programmatic area to really make progress on the big societal issues that we are facing. And that is one kind of area why I'm excited about the use of data in the nonprofit space. I think the other aspect is that we really need civil society to be present at the table, and I feel often also leading in terms of how do we want to develop and use these technologies and approaches. And organizations can only do that if they have an understanding and experience in using those. So those are two aspects, but I think that the point of partnership is also a critical one. So to use one example, we have a multi-year grantee partner called Terre des Hommes, or we say TDH to make it easier. They are based in Switzerland, the leading child relief organization in Switzerland, working on kind of child and maternal health, child rights, and so on and so forth. But we are working with them in the area of digital health. But one thing why we have found that they were able to make such good progress is they have partnered with the University of Geneva, which is providing kind of additional help and expertise around data science and special expertise in the area of digital health. TDH itself, so the project is operating in Burkina Faso, brings that deep understanding of the context of the government relations. How do you implement something, in West Africa, in that specific country? And we bring the technical expertise. So I think that has been a great model, proven to be a great model for us. And I think that's why I'm excited about the initiative that you are kicking off today. I know we are going to talk more about responsible kind of development and use of AI, and I think it just needs to be embedded every step along the way. And I think there's probably a lot more that we are going to say about this in the next 45 minutes or so. So I'll stop here.
No, thank you, Claudia. And I think there's a lot of these topics which we'll go deeper into. So looking forward to that. Sorrell, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I'm Sorelle Friedler. I'm the Assistant Director for Data and Democracy at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. My work at OSTP focuses on data and AI policy, and especially on the ways that we can create guardrails for these technologies, right? These responsible AI ideas. And that includes our initiative to create a Bill of Rights, a rights-preserving framework to protect people from potential harms of AI and other such technologies. My background is as a computer science professor, and before that as a software engineer. As a researcher, I focused on the fairness and interpretability of machine learning, which included applications from accelerating the development of new solar cell materials to concerns about discrimination and criminal risk assessments and other areas where society meets data, meets AI. As some of the other panelists have also said, I'm also excited about the potential for AI to help with cancer diagnoses, to help us make sense of climate data. There's also obviously applications for pandemic preparedness, especially when we think about drug discovery. Accelerating the discovery of new drugs is obviously of concern to all of us. I think there's also additional applications that don't get as much attention, but really have the potential to change society, right? These are especially things relating to infrastructure, relating to having more efficiencies in things that might not, again, get as much attention, but are really important, like waste management, road maintenance, right? Smart grids, sanitation, all of these are really important and can benefit from really data-driven techniques. There's also, a whole host of important applications that we need to be careful about around equity. And some of those, again, don't get as much attention. These are things like assistive technologies, right? Automated closed captioning, we've all benefited from. And we can also see innovations in the way that we find efficiencies for food security. Crop surveillance can use computer vision techniques and other things like that. So I think there's a lot of potential, and I think that a lot of that potential hasn't yet been explored. So I'm excited to see the various things that we as a research community can come up with in the future.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for kind of framing the beginning. I think I often feel like in these types of conversations, especially when working with governments, with NGOs, a lot of people like us are kind of playing this dual role, right? We're sort of cheerleading them, saying you should be using more data and evidence because it's not as if humans are perfect and do everything so well. But be careful. So we kind of keep going back and forth, like, yes, you should do this, but do it carefully. So I'm curious, for all of you, sort of, when we sort of tell these organizations to be careful, kind of what are some of the risks what are some of the things that you've experienced, or what are some of the risks you're worried about if we're not careful? What are you seeing on the ground as you're working in these areas? Anyone who wants to take that, yeah, Claudia.
Happy to start us off with a couple of pieces. I think the things that I'm seeing working with nonprofit organization, one is I do think that nonprofits have the best of intent, but they work with some of the most vulnerable populations, and so the bar beyond kind of what we discuss in terms of regulatory or legal environments, needs to be super high for them. And I think they are very aware of it, but it's sometimes hard for them to really pinpoint what does that mean and how do they practically do that. That involves kind of technically what needs to be done, whether it's encryption or kind of just securing the data that they have, but securing it kind of every step along the data lifecycle, but also the change management processes basically that they need to implement, or the kind of the organizational policies that they need to implement. So there's a question of what capabilities do I need in-house to govern, steward the data assets that I have in the best possible way. I think a very different aspect for me is that everybody's looking at what's possible today. And the more organizations are venturing out, are thinking about combining their data sets with other data sets, are thinking about data sharing mechanisms. What they might be doing today might be safe and kind of adhere with standards, but kind of the question of what might that enable governments in future as tools kind of advance and governments change their attitudes. Those kind of the future proofing of some of those solutions is definitely something that is fairly high on my mind. And maybe as part of that, I feel that we talk a lot about personal data and how do we anonymize, how do we safeguard personal data, but there is risk potential in non-personal data, and then in the combination thereof. Those are some of the aspects that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, Sorelle, Hoda, Paula. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'll jump in. I absolutely agree with that emphasis on sort of data-driven risks and the way that data flows can sometimes create risks that are non-obvious. I think another area that seems really important to focus on to me is this issue of lack of understandability or interpretability or explainability, whatever word you want to use, to understand what's going on behind these systems. And I think that is a risk, both for the basic science aspects of it, right? Because we obviously don't want to try to roll out various scientific solutions without understanding the science behind it. And without making sure that it's correct. But we also have those same issues when it comes to deploying AI in areas that more directly impact people. And so we need to make sure that we understand what these systems are doing, and that, in the case of high stakes systems, that we understand that really quite well and can ensure that these are decisions that we want to be made in that way.
Right. So does that, I guess, the question here would be, we have these systems called humans who've been making these very high stakes decisions for a long, long time. Is the bar sort of as explanatory as humans are? or is the bar different for the AIs that we're producing?
So I think in some cases, AI is subject to more risks than humans would be in similar situations, right? There are cases where, for example, COVID systems that have been developed to try to help diagnose people with COVID were susceptible to picking up on whether the patient was lying down or standing up when the scan was taken. Right. Those are things that we don't have to worry about with the doctor who's going to, understand which things to pay attention to and which things not to. Right. And so in some cases, yes, I think these systems do need additional protections because they don't have the same sort of human judgment in place to understand what is reasonable and what is not.
Right. No, that's a good point. And I think last week I was at an event where they were talking about sort of in COVID, a lot of these virtual visits were happening, and a lot of the diagnosis that physicians do in person, they couldn't do them, they couldn't touch, they couldn't, and so now is sort of this AI assisted diagnosis happening. That's how do we translate that on symptoms? Can I get the heart rate for somebody from video? Can I figure out their pulse? Can I figure out their breathing rate? And those sort of things lead to interesting discussions.
I was just going to jump in and kind of add to what Sorelle was saying, which is, even if you were to assume these things were on equal par, right, which I would be debatable. We've had, arguably centuries to develop systems to hold people accountable for their decision making in cases where it's very consequential. So back to your question about risks, and to bring it back down to basics and state the obvious, you were worried about places where AI is making decisions that are deeply consequential to people's lives, the jobs they get, whether they get credit, whether they get sentenced for a crime, all of these types of very, very deeply consequential decisions. And arguably when you have a person making those decisions and there's an objection, particularly for these categories of really consequential decisions, there's, decades or centuries of systems around that, safeguards around that. And I think where we are with AI is we're just starting to develop those sets of safeguards. And the question of explainability makes it all the more difficult. And that's, I think, that's where you start to see regulatory frameworks coming up to try to protect those particularly delicate areas.
Yep, absolutely. With that, do you want to add anything on the risks?
I would like to just add to what was already said, that with AI, the types of risk that we have to be careful about is just inherently different, right? So with human beings, we have an intuitive and innate understanding of, what are some of the values that we collectively hold dear, and we take those into account in our decisions. With AI, the risk is that, we usually can give it one very narrowly defined and very specific objective, and it is very good at, making that one objective optimal. But the problem is that when it comes to decisions with social consequences, the decision itself is very complex. It is very difficult to define one objective that the AI can go about optimizing. So the types of values that we need to be careful of complying with or adhering to as we are designing our AI, it's just a vast list of values that we need to be careful about. So I can maybe at the risk of advertising for my own research, I can mention that in a recent work we asked research community members to tell us about what do they see as gaps in the research that has been done in this area in recent years, and they raised a long list of very good and important issues that we need to account for, including things like human agency, how these systems impact human agency, how do they impact their what they perceive as their dignity and as their respect, whether they feel included, whether they feel like they have avenues for participation, how does it impact social norms such as solidarity, and so on and so forth. So these are all important questions to think about as we go about designing these systems. But again, it's a very complex set of considerations that we need to account for, and that what makes it challenging to ensure we develop AI in a responsible manner.
Right. And I think, one of the risks, I think for me, the key risk really is when you have lots of humans making lots of micro decisions, the risk is somewhat spread out, right? So you can hope that every judge before lunch isn't, horrible. That some judges won't be, and some decisions will be made after lunch, and some will not be hungry all the time. But with AI, there won't be millions of different systems in place. There will be a handful of systems that are going to be standardized, deployed, and used, and that just increases the risk. Even if they're as bad as humans, there'll just be 3 of them. And I think we have to kind of, and the people who develop them and the people who are part of that process and the safeguards and all these things they have to be standardized. So I think in my mind, like that's one big difference in the systematic world versus the hope for some randomness world. I'm curious, sort of, as Claudia, you were talking about the need for sort of people, civil society, community members to be present at the table. What are sort of some good ways you've seen of bringing the community members, bringing the people being affected to the table when designing these types of systems?
Yes, and maybe to add to the prior point of conversation, it's not like we haven't had systemic discrimination before, or currently in areas where we are not using AI. And so this question, how could maybe not artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence make some of these processes better, where if we had really open and transparent decision supporting infrastructure, that they would reveal where we have biases. Because like you said, whether the judge is hungry or and we can definitely provide even worse examples of that is a very, it's not a harmless, but so I think that's just a point that I wanted to add in terms of it's not like we are going from an unbiased world to a biased world. What we are doing in the worst case is we are kind of moving all the biases that we have had and bake them into a new system and maybe exacerbate them, because now we are executing on them at even more scale in many ways. But what does it mean to kind of bring people in? I think 2 quick thoughts. One is the nonprofits that we work with often are also intermediaries for populations that they serve. And in the best case, they are fully representative of those populations. But again, it's a kind of an intermediary voice. And I think ideally we want members of the community who are providing data, where data is being used to make decisions for and with those communities, that they sit at the table. I think one example that I've really liked and thought was excellent, there is the Invisible Institute in Chicago, and they work on kind of sexual harassment as part of kind of police cases. So there's a complaint against a police officer, and it's about something else, but there is kind of an aspect of sexual harassment against women, Black and brown women, trans women, kind of included. But it's because that you can only make kind of one claim. The claim can only be about one thing. From the reports, you can't detect it. So one thing that the Invisible Institute has done is they have basically gotten access to many pages of kind of PDF reports. And the first thing that they needed to do was establish training data. And they worked with volunteers from kind of the Chicago community with other women. And I think that was from what I heard and what those colleagues told us. I mean, it's for people themselves to be involved, and also to, it's part of their lived experience and what they are seeing. So they are, but also to make sure that they are kind of tagging what they are experiencing. So I thought that was an excellent example for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm curious, Paula, kind of connecting that, as you're sort of at Salesforce, you guys are developing products that are not kind of used by kind of community members or civil society. They're kind of intermediaries using them. Do you think about kind of how in developing these type of things, what the role of the larger society is? How does that sort of fit into what you guys think about at Salesforce?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're getting at is that we're largely enterprise software, right? So it's not necessarily visible like in a very public sense, but is operating sort of behind the scenes for both, big companies and nonprofits and whatnot. And I will say, yeah, we think a lot about, it's a slightly different set of questions, but the question of like, what is the end impact on society and how do we create a feedback loop and a multi-stakeholder process as we're making these decisions is certainly top of mind. I will say like one example of that, and we've created a bunch of infrastructure internally. For example, we have an ethical use advisory council that has outside experts as well as frontline employees and executives on it. But we have like a whole set of processes to essentially ensure that when decisions are getting made about the technologies that we're creating, that it's a very deliberative process and that we're bringing in, representatives of impacted communities. We're bringing in questions of like various perspectives on maybe the same problem. Several years ago, kind of as a result of that process, we decided not to go into facial recognition. And if you look at our acceptable use policy, you'll see that we don't allow our customers to use our AI vision technology for facial recognition because the research had been so clear about some of the impacts of facial recognition in the criminal justice system for people with darker skin, right? And if you think about other technologies, like there's similar sets of feedback loops that need to exist to be able to create and for entities to be able to navigate this space, right? So the question that Claudia was getting at, this question of participation, I think, is crucial. And it requires really all stakeholders on deck. It brings me great joy to see a panel like this across academia, government, civil society, and business. Like, I'd love to see this all the time because this is what's going to get us to answers.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Is it kind of cutting across these, and in some ways, I mean, Sorrell, a large part of what OSTP does is convening. We're kind of bringing people together from different areas. How are you seeing kind of in your role at OSTP, sort of how are you bringing the different stakeholders together in the design of these systems?
Yeah, so I would echo what the other panelists said. I think that's critically important to make sure that people who are impacted by the technologies are really heard as part of the development process and as part of the decision to even decide to use technology. I think that people who are impacted community members need to be involved in the decision then. And we've been conducting, as part of our Bill of Rights initiative, we've been conducting a policy planning process that's purposefully engaged with a large number of stakeholders from academia and also from industry and also from civil society. But we've also held open listening sessions with the public to hear, what their concerns are about these technologies. We've heard from teenagers who wanted to express their concern about being surveilled by drone technologies at protests. We've heard from parents who were concerned about facial recognition technology being used in their kids' schools. We've heard from industry, right, who want to make sure that there are clear rules of the road so that they can develop these technologies for the many good use cases we've already described. And so yes, I would echo what everyone has said. I think that's critically important, and it's been also very, very useful in terms of understanding what the harms are and also what we can do about them. Right? I think that there are in fact many concrete actions that we can take to try to institute clear guardrails for these technologies. And I think that many of them are frankly not that surprising to people who already work in industry, right? Many of these are already good software engineering development practices that would be part of any sort of standard launch plan, right? Making sure that the technology works, making sure that, you have a plan to continue to monitor it, that you have a dashboard set up with all of the relevant metrics, right? All of these sort of usual launch procedures, we need to make sure are actually in place for these high stakes technologies. And then I think that there are additional guardrails that we're going to need to add, right? Additional metrics that need to be added to our dashboard, focusing on non-discrimination. And we also need to make sure that the community consultation that we've been talking about continues after a product is launched, because of course there are going to be unanticipated outcomes. And we want to make sure that if there's the possibility to incorporate that gained understanding from what happens when the technologies are being used in society back in to make them better, or potentially to roll them back if needed.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely to your point of kind of using the metrics that exist kind of in just good software performance, but then adding the specific things, for example, around non-discrimination, right? So kind of coming to Hoda, I think a lot of your work is around sort of discrimination and bias and machine learning methods to deal with that. How sort of what types of I guess what are the gaps today that you see, Hoda, in that are kind of stopping people from doing that? What are the things that are not available off the shelf that we need to develop in order to make responsible AI real?
That's a very good question, and I would say there has been recent efforts towards making many of the decisions that go into the machine learning pipeline more participatory. As Sorelle mentioned, perhaps one of the most important decisions we are currently making without sufficient deliberation is whether it is actually appropriate to build these systems. And so there has been recent efforts around designing participatory frameworks to bring stakeholders to the table. For example, there has been work, including some of my own, where we try to capture people's moral judgments in order to design, metrics for, again, auditing at scale. But these are, in a sense, I would say, even though I myself have worked in this area, I would say that these kinds of participatory frameworks are limited in scope. They are built with a very particular purpose, with a very particular question, and with a very particular framing. In reality, engaging impacted communities and stakeholders takes a lot of time. It takes developing those relationships before we go to the community and ask them, hey, here is what we are building anyway. What do you think? How do you think we can, we can make it slightly more palatable for you, right? So this should not be the question, right? So the question should be, how do we build those relationships? And again, here at CMU, we have several faculty whose research is very much focused around building these relationships. We have, for example, Mike Skirpan at the Institute for Software Research, who is also the executive director of a Community Forge, an initiative that works on programs trying to advance an equitable local economy. We have Sarah Fox, and we have other faculty whose focus is on empowering impacted communities. For example, we have Julia Fanti, who is working with the Gates Foundation and CMU Africa in Rwanda to study the implications of data transparency and cybersecurity on the financial inclusion, how the sense of inclusion by impacted communities. So these are just some good examples from CMU, and also mentioning that generally this is challenging, but we are making progress. We are not there yet. A long way to go, but we are making good progress, hopefully.
Right, but hopefully not too long to go. right? Because we have to get there. And I think the examples you're giving are great, right? Mike and Sarah and Julia and the work you're talking about with Heidari and Hong, and I think that sort of highlights kind of the local community collaborations of these systems are not built for them, they're built with them ideally, but yet we have very few good examples of that work happening. I'm curious for sort of, and Paula, Sorelle, Claudia, any of you can jump in. Like, what are the ways that governments and industry and nonprofits can kind of work with academia to make that more real, to make that kind of happen faster? From each of your perspectives, how does academia, Hoda and I that are here, and many of you used to be there in academia, because of what do we do? What are the ways to work for different sectors to work with academia?
I guess I'll start us off. So, I think that we really need a collaboration, right? I think it needs to be across all of the sectors that we've mentioned. And I think that we need a collaboration to develop best practices, standards for what reasonable expectations are for these technologies before they are deployed, right? And those are going to need to be specific to the type of technology, the use case, the community, right? But I do think that we can still develop those, right? We can determine, what appropriate tests need to be performed on this technology before it's reasonable to deploy it, right? What governance procedures do we think need to be in place? What are the best practices for overseeing these technologies, right? How do we want to handle data? What are the best practices for handling data, for giving users control over their data, and for communicating that control to users, right? What are the sort of associated transparency and auditing standards that we want to have in place so that the public can have confidence that their rights are being respected in the use of these technologies, right? And I think that we need to work together to come up with those list of things so that people know, okay, before I release this technology, I need to make sure that I have these following things in place. I need to make sure that it passes these metrics, but also that I have these human-run governance procedures in place, right?
Plus one on all of that, but and speaking from the civil society vantage point, maybe to get even more practical, is how can we better align the incentives for academia and civil society? So I think both have a lot to gain from collaborating with each other, but sometimes the research agendas and what the nonprofits are doing on the ground might not always be fully aligned, and nonprofits might not have the super cutting edge use case that maybe academia might be looking for. So this question of, I feel the organizations where you have been, Rayid, I think you have cared a lot about what's the overlap, but I think it needs deliberate thinking. I think the second aspect for me, having been now in the space for a while and having seen also volunteer engagement, the nonprofit sector needs consistency, continuity, reliability. So while I think occasionally highly specialized volunteer services are really useful, but how can we make that something that's truly reliable? And we are talking about the data of people of vulnerable populations. So this is not the area to experiment, although some pilots are definitely needed, but how can we set this up that this is leading to production, and it's not a test case within a thesis, but it's really to move a field forward and a relevant area of practice.
And I might just add one thing, which is that we are in need, I think, of both hard rules and soft rules, right, around AI development. And I think of hard rules as those that come from the government, right? And I think of soft rules as sort of the norms that that really influence development in this space. And so when I think about that, I think about, wow, imagine if, and this is already starting to happen, but imagine if like, you know, the most famous, the hotshot young researchers are the ones that are coming up with technical technical solutions to these very difficult ethics challenges. And imagine if the norms that like have already proliferated through this space. If we think about model cards, or we think about, you know, the pioneering research on facial recognition, which actually led to regulatory changes as well as norms in the industry. Like if we think about that sort of generation of innovation that's coming from academia, which is, you know, seen to be independent and can kind of come up with these things without influence, theoretically, then that would be an incredible trend to witness. So I'd say that, but I'd also say secondarily, don't discount the role that you all play in training technologists. I've been super, super heartened to see the new, you know, courses on technology ethics and AI ethics that are sort of being mainstreamed into various curriculum from computer science to elsewhere. And to think about that as just the norm through which technologists gets trained, and for them to carry that then with them wherever they go, whether that's government, industry, or elsewhere, is incredibly important. And so I think those two things are both foundational.
Yeah, and I think up to your point of training, because you can't really blame people if you've never kind of, at least as all of us being in a university, we can't blame people for not doing the right things if we never did that thing, if we never covered those topics. And so I think you're absolutely right. In the increase of classes making computer scientists read philosophy papers, as painful as they find them, and they do find them painful, but I think it's good for their soul and hopefully good for the world. And by the way, we'll if people have questions, just keep putting them in the Q&A, and we'll take the time. We'll sort of keep inserting them into. I want to sort of take a couple of questions that are coming up. I think one question that came up in there is there's a lot of kind of participatory frameworks that already exist, but there's also a lot of conversation around participatory governance in democracy. And the question that came from the audience, Vincent, who's actually an incoming new faculty member at CMU, the question is, do these approaches work well for AI governance as well, or do we need something different? Or do we think that we have enough approaches that are there already? We need to apply them to AI development and AI governance. I don't know who wants to take that question. Hoda, go ahead.
And I would just mention that, we are at times where, generally speaking, the concept of democracy is being reshaped, and our understanding of what democracy means is being reshaped. And partly this is because of the new tools that have been developed in recent years with the advent of, social networking platforms, recommender systems, and so on. To some extent, those have been instrumental to the changes the shift in the landscape we are seeing in what democracy means, how it functions, how we can safeguard it, and so on. So I think I'm more sort of raising the fact that we are at a stage where we need to rethink some of the fundamentals of what it means for a process to be democratic and so on, and sort of revisit how we can safeguard those values. So democratic Participation might be one of the best tools we have available. It has its own limitations and it has its own risks that we need to be cognizant of as we try to implement those values in our design and in our work.
Yep, I think that's. I mean, one thing I sort of want to make sure we mention or we cover at least is every time I hear something around a framework and ethics and AI, I sort of at this point just roll my eyes because there's so many. Every company has 5 of these frameworks. Every country has 20. There are thousands of these out there, but they're just words. I'm curious, like as we are creating yet another, responsible AI initiative, if our intentions are to make it operational and really focused on community impact, what would you all suggest what should be our measures of success? How do we evaluate whether we're making progress and whether we're having an impact? What would you advise us as we launch this effort?
I mean, go ahead, Paula.
Go ahead, Claudia, please.
Well, I was about to say that in philanthropy, you think a lot about also measurement and evaluation and how do you do that, and there is the concept of kind of what are outcomes and what is ultimately impact. I mean, I do think that some indicators along the way speak to the kind of diversity and inclusion of different groups in the process, and what does that look like every step along the way, not only at the beginning, not only at the end, but kind of consistently and kind of a measurement of how did that really, were changes being made based on the input that was provided. So I feel that is but in terms of impact, I think looking at the end when a project has been done or a solution has been implemented, does it really serve, does it really address a component of the problem or the problem that it's set out to do? I think those would be some measurements from my perspective.
And what I was going to say too, linking back to our earlier conversation, was if you think about training research on areas where technical solutions, if you think about a technology that could have enormous and positive impact if well established, and could have harmful impact if it's not inclusive, right? And then training the focus of technology on what are the technical solutions to that, like focusing the research on the technical solutions and being able to disseminate that. That's where I see a real gap, right? And that's where I see the credibility of a CMU as like being able to step into that space, because I think people are well aware of the problem. And as you said, well aware of sort of broad values-based frameworks that they can employ, but then kind of having the sort of industry standards of how we deal with different situations. I think that space is still early, and that's a place where there's just so much room to innovate.
And I would really echo that. I think, as I was saying earlier, right, we really need these interdisciplinary and cross-sector teams to start to develop and put out best practices that really say, this is what we should be doing. And, I think those are not necessarily the usual things that academics put out, right? This is not sort of a standard research paper product, but it's incredibly important. And so, that is the type of thing that I would hope we would start to see academics more involved in, along with all of our partners, right, from government and civil society and industry.
So you're asking academics to be useful. Take a sabbatical, be useful, and then go back. Hoda, you were going to say something.
I just wanted to add one point, which I'm borrowing from my colleague Alex John London at the philosophy department here. He has worked extensively on ethics of new technologies, including AI. And in one of his talks, he mentioned this important point that in order to ensure impact, But we cannot stay at the high level, design high level solutions and high level metrics and hope for impact, but rather it's best to, and I'm paraphrasing, Alex, I'm sorry if I'm if I'm wrongly paraphrasing, but if we want to have impact, we need to focus on specific domains, and we need to measure our progress with respect to that domain, right? So to what extent are we impacting the policy and practices within that domain? So that was one form of impact that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely. I think the one thing I want to remind the audience is, we're coming into the panel, but we want all of you to come and partner with us in whatever way you want to, right? So again, email us at responsibleai@cmu.edu, and that's the only way I think we can make progress, is by collaborating with people. If you're a community member, if you're in government, if you're in industry, if you're in nonprofit, if you're in academia, the whole point of this initiative is to connect pieces together that are kind of working independently. So we'd love to partner with people here. I want to sort of just ask one last question, just one sentence answer. If hopefully we've gotten a lot of people and students and community members watching this. Each of you, if you can kind of say just one sentence on sort of what is the best way for a community member or a student to really get involved in this type of effort? What is the best way for them individually to ensure that when AI systems get developed by people around them, for people around them, that it leads to equitable outcomes? What would be your kind of one sentence advice of how do you get involved?
I'll jump in and say, I'll say ask questions would be my one sentence advice. Like, AI is everywhere. It's in every aspect of our lives, right? So once you start to notice that, ask questions, like take to social media and ask questions about like, how is this, why am I seeing this, right? And I think the more people that ask questions, the better answers we'll have to those questions.
I like that answer, and I would add the question, who's missing at the table?
I would also add that community members should trust your lived experience, right? You are already experts in what you have experienced, and you shouldn't let talking to technologists take that away from you, right? And we technologists should correspondingly listen to what you have to say.
And I would just echo what was already said, staying curious and staying informed about the impact of these technologies in our lives, understanding the power that each and every one of us has vis-a-vis these systems, and finding our voice and using it responsibly.
Okay, wow, that's great. That's really good advice, and I think I think we're slightly over time, so we've got some interesting questions. What we're going to do is pass on these questions to the panelists, and if you're able to and interested, you can respond to them. But please continue to engage with us through again other channels, and tell us if you want to work with us in any capacity. I'm thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Hoda, Paula, Claudia, Sorelle, for joining us here. Thank you for the audience for being here and helping us launch this new initiative. This is the beginning, and so we're excited, and we want to partner with people and help figure out how to design responsible AI systems. So thank you, all of you, for being here, and stay connected with us, and we'll be doing more events over the next few months. So we'd love to see you all there, and hopefully some of them in person. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. It was great to be here.